So you can get lots of aggregatable reports, which is practically raw data. And you decide when you want to get the summary report. So you can also track a month or 2 months after the install happened. And it really attests to the level of freedom that Google provides. But with that comes also complexity, right? So integrating with Android Privacy Sandbox is more complicated than integrating with SKAdNetwork.
Privacy Sandbox on Android is coming soon, and it's time to embrace the suck. Hello and welcome to Growth Masterminds. My name is John Koetsier. I kind of love the phrase embrace the suck. It's something I've said to my kids a lot when they're doing something that's hard. It's something I say to myself when I'm doing something that's hard but worthwhile. It's about leaning in to hard stuff so you can eventually make it easy. We saw that happening on iOS with ATT and SKAN. Marketers who leaned in and got better at it. They did better at it, and they achieved better results. It's likely the same thing is going to happen with Privacy Sandbox and Android. It's not going to be easy, but it will happen. It's coming. The GAID is going away, and it will be worthwhile to lean in. So to start embracing the suck, we're chatting today with two people. Ron Shub is a software architect at Singular, and Yuval Carmel is the chief architect at Singular. Welcome, Ron. Welcome, Yuval.
Hey, great to be here.
Awesome. Super pumped to have you. Hey, we're diving in one of the first times, I think, on Growth Masterminds. We've talked about it a bunch on the blog. We're going to do more on that as well. But as everybody knows, Privacy Sandbox is an attempt from Google to do kind of three things, right? Show relevant content and ads, measure ad effectiveness, and limit tracking. Yuval, maybe kick us off here. What's your overall impression of Privacy Sandbox and Android?
So, yeah, John, I think Google are investing a lot of time and engineering in this solution. You can see it quite a bit. They're building a privacy-oriented solution, which will require UA marketers to define properly what they want to track and in which granularity in advance. So the solution basically migrates the attribution logic to the device. Like we're moving into to do more work on the client itself. And then it requires more complex management of the triggers and the conversions you want to track. So the marketing data won't be available anymore with PII attached to it as we are used to it, like user level data. Things are going to be different a little bit, and probably reporting like the data reporting is going to be more aggregated. We're going to see more aggregated reports, people using more aggregated data, and less relying on user level data. And the idea here is obviously that it will be hard to track back single users' behavior and usage of specific apps. One thing to mention is that the Sandbox team in Google are working closely with us and other partners to make sure the solution is well scrutinized and tested, like well architected as well, which is pretty cool. It's a great approach. Like if you take the opposite of what you mentioned, embrace the suck. So embrace the suck is like a military term, right? And because you have to, there's no way, there's no other way. You have to embrace the suck. And with previous changes in the privacy landscape with other companies, you really had to embrace the suck. You couldn't do anything. You couldn't talk to anyone. There was no work relations over there. And here, basically, we see Google working with the partners and trying to make sure the suck will be easier to embrace.
Love it, love it, love it. Ron, if you look at Privacy Sandbox and you look at, SKAN, iOS, compare and contrast them for us.
Right. So yeah, Google are trying to solve the same problem, right? And doing privacy enhancing solution that limits user level tracking. But I can say that the approach is super different between SKAdNetwork and Android Privacy Sandbox, for example. Firstly, taking ATT, just to recap, ATT is App Tracking Transparency, first introduced in iOS 14.5. That changed the behavior from opting out to opt-in. So when you install an app, you get a pop-up, and you need to say if you allow tracking, and then most people say no. right? And then you don't have, we or the MMPs, they don't have anymore the IDFA. The IDFA is reset, and it makes it much harder to track marketing data. So Google's approach is a bit different. They say we first want to have an alternative. We want to have the Privacy Sandbox and APIs, and only later, perhaps we'll talk about deprecating the Google Advertising ID. So we think the Google Advertising ID is here to stay for now, and there's no particular plans to deprecate it. And when they will deprecate it, they will give a substantial notice before. And when talking about SKAdNetwork compared to Google Alternative, which is the Attribution Reporting API, then they're both, again, trying to solve the same thing, but the approaches are super, super different. So few teasers, documentation-wise, Google supply tons of documentations and repositories. They basically open sourced everything to us, and it's really helpful in understanding how the infrastructure will look, what we can do with it, how can we deal with noise, etc., etc. And a few specific teasers is, for example, dimensions. In SKAdNetwork, you get a SKAN campaign ID, which is a number between 0 and 99, just 100 options. Now in SKAdNetwork 4.0, you get a bit more options with source ID, but it's really standardized and it's quite capped. Google supply 128 bits, which is much, much, much bigger. It gives you a lot of place to encode your dimensions. Another small teaser is Apple limited the way that you, when you get the conversion window is practically limited. So you can only track after install for a few days. Google doesn't have this limit at all. So you can get lots of aggregatable reports, which is practically raw data. And you decide when you want to get the summary report. So you can also track a month or 2 months after the install happened. And it really attests to the level of freedom that Google provides. But with that comes also complexity, right? So integrating with Android Privacy Sandbox is more complicated than integrating with SKAdNetwork.
That is an interesting phrase, and that perhaps will not come to many marketers as happy news, because most have said that SKAN is really challenging, and that was already in 3. And 4 is more challenging with more options and more postbacks and more delays and all those sorts of things. Now, there's some testing happening right now. Privacy Sandbox is in beta. You've been working with a developer preview. What are some of the biggest learnings and takeaways from working with the developer preview?
Yeah, so we've been very impressed with Google efforts, like Yuval mentioned. Bunch of documentations and repositories that help us go through and understand what's going to introduce really soon. Our current objective is to complete an end-to-end testing of the attribution reporting API, which means from registering a click through querying the aggregation service and getting back the decoded and decrypted summary report. There are some hurdles on the way. It doesn't go very smooth, but Google has been super attentive. There's currently another issue that we're facing, and we think we're on the verge of solving it. And we're really excited to be able to finish the end-to-end test and be practically ready for the Privacy Sandbox. So yeah, Google is super responsive in answering questions and helping us out. And they seem to be investing tons of resources, and we enjoy working together.
Super interesting. You're working on it now. As we're recording, it's May 1. This will probably be released in 2 weeks or so. We have, I think, till the end of the year before, the GAID might go away and other things will happen. But yeah, there's going to be some time there. So big picture, if we look at Privacy Sandbox, there's 3 privacy preserving APIs, as Google calls them, across web and Android, right? There's Topics API, which should allow for much better targeting than we currently have on iOS, but I still think the granularity is going to be a challenge. There's what they used to call Fledge API, which is now Protected Audiences API. That should allow retargeting and maybe a couple other use cases. But Yuval, you're most concerned, of course, with the attribution reporting API. I don't know why. There's some odd reason about that, but that's where you're spending most of your time. Your thoughts? How good is it?
Yeah, that's a great question. As you mentioned, it looks like Google are basically trying to find a solution for every reason you use Google Advertising ID, right? So they get the topics API for you for retargeting purposes, and the fledged or audiences protected API for audiences. And in the attribution reporting API, what's my thoughts regarding it and how good is it? It's the attribution reporting privacy sandbox is going to change the way some of us are used to see marketing data. So we have a lot of customers that are still used to see user level data and marketing data attached to specific users, to their PII even. So although we have SKAN and the changes in the industry, many people just, like many customers we heard in the industry, basically stopped marketing in iOS and just heavily based themselves on Android. And now they'll have the same issue in Android as well. User level data is going to be super limited. You have like 3 bits, as Ron mentioned, or we mentioned in one of the next questions maybe. You have like just 3 bits to collect information regarding an event, but of course the attribution aggregated reporting can be utilized for the marketing purposes if you understand the requirements and how to execute. So, is it good? It's a good solution for privacy first and foremost. It's a great solution for privacy because everything will be more private. Your PII is more protected. Your information is more protected. Your behavior is less easily measured and tracked. But it is a really complex solution for marketing and performance measurement. Luckily for our customers, of course, we plan to be there for them and handle the heavy lifting, of course, in the beginning, and we'll guide them quite a lot. But what's going to be hard? So it's going to be hard to understand how to define your aggregation keys, or basically dimensions, or the granularity in which you want to measure and track your conversions. It's going to be, and it's a little bit complex to understand how to manage your, like the conversion events themselves. We will talk about it a bit more later on, but the idea here is that the solution is really generic, and it gives you the freedom to figure out the best measurement that method for you. Like whatever you need, you can basically implement here, which is a great advantage, but it will be quite complex, I think, for advertisers to manage by themselves.
Super interesting. Just to have a step back for a second and think about the landscape of mobile and mobile apps and how it's changed over the past year and a half and over the next year. It'll be fascinating to look back at this point in history and say, oh, that's why apps do this now, because the conversion models for advertisers needed to change. So the product needed to. It'll be interesting to see. Ron, let's turn to you. I always ask when I talk to people, I'm talking about SKAN, what estimate the level of drop of ad efficiency from IDFA to SKAN. And I'm going to ask you that in terms of Android. It's really early, of course. You're just starting to work with this. It's not out in the wild. It's not being used by very many people at all, just tested. Can you guesstimate how much ad efficiency might drop as we move from SKAdNetwork to Android Privacy Sandbox?
Hey, actually, I'll take this one. So I think the SKAdNetwork and the ad efficiency drop, or basically the problem here is measurement, right? And the measurement efficiency is going to drop on SKAdNetwork. And once the measurement isn't as accurate and possible, of course, the ad efficiency will drop as well. So the thing is that for click-through attributions, we have the Google Play install referrer as well. I think most of our Android-based attributions are based on Google Play install referrer, which is probably the best and most accurate mechanism to attribute and match ad clicks to app installs in Android devices. So as long as this is as it's available, the Google Play install refer, I believe most marketing attribution and our attribution as well will work with this reliable and robust solution. It's the best solution. You can basically you pass things to the Google Play Store and you get it as an intent from them in the MMP SDK, in our SDK. So it works the best, and you can reliably attribute users that way. So if if Google will deprecate the Google Advertising ID, I think click but won't deprecate the Google Play install refer. I think for click through attribution, we still have a really robust and accurate method to calculate attributions, the same as we do today. Great question to Google, which probably none of them really have a definitive answer. What will happen with Google Play install refer? We're still waiting on an answer, and I think some of them still waiting on an answer. So no one really knows what's the plan over there. Regarding view through attribution, it's a bit different. You don't have the Google Play install refer over there. We're currently relying on getting impressions reporting from the networks themselves, from the partners themselves. I'm not talking about self-attributing ones like Google Ads and Facebook. I'm talking about the other guys out there that are basically sending the impressions to us, and then we're the one matching using the Google Advertising ID with the clicks that we also get. In that aspect, I think that the Google Advertising ID deprecation will affect the view through attribution quite heavily. And I think we see that the sandbox solution will probably be used first and foremost for view through attribution and not for click through, as long as we have the refer solution.
Super interesting. So we'll see if we continue to have that. We saw that fingerprinting became an issue on iOS, and Apple addressed it and said, hey, that is measurement, that is tracking, that is not allowed. What do you see happening with fingerprinting on Android as Privacy Sandbox comes in?
Right. So we assume the same will probably happen. I mean, people will still continue to use fingerprinting as long as they can and feel comfortable doing it. But as Apple did, I'm assuming that also one day in the future, Google will decide that they want to make fingerprinting harder and even not possible in some cases, and will not really enable it anymore. And when that day happens, then people will need to find other solutions. But Google did mention that they will give a substantial heads up before that. So we're not thinking it's going to happen anytime soon. And for now, fingerprinting is still in play.
Yet another reason to embrace the suck, because when it does happen, you'll have to be good at other things. Okay, cool. Ron, talk about event level reports and how they differ from aggregated reports.
Right. So yeah, Google's in attribution reporting API supports two types of reports. Event level reports is more suited for optimization. So it can be used, for example, for training data for machine learning models. For example, when you want to optimize ad placements. But the issue with event level reports is that the conversion data is super coarse. You don't get almost any data about what happened after the install. So practically for view through attribution, you get 1 bit, and for click through attribution, you get 3 bits. So that's practically, you can't encode anything almost there. And
go into detail here. 1 bit. What can you do in 1 bit?
nothing. No, you can practically say...
Is it like on off? Is that 1 bit?
You can say, did that happen or did that not happen, right? So
it's binary.
You can say, add to cart happened. So that's pretty much it. You have to choose one event and focus on it and just say if it happened or it didn't happen. But that's not much information. In aggregatable reports, you get a lot of freedom in the conversion data, practically the same 128 bits we mentioned before that you can split between the registering of the source of the click or the view and registering triggers. So you can register many metrics, events or revenue, and really measure what happened, what the journey that the user did in the device after he installed the app. So again, event level reports good for optimization. Aggregatable reports is very good for reporting, for campaign performance measurement, and that's why here in Singular we really focus on that, because it's going to give the most accurate data with less noise and much more flexibility.
And yet there will be some noise added, correct?
Yeah, there would be.
So there's some noise added. Walk us through the flow. Give us a sense of what happens when you're placing an ad, somebody clicks on it, they install, they do something. How's that flow work through all of Privacy Sandbox?
Yeah. So that's a question that there's no really short answer for, but I will try to summarize it as much as possible. So the first steps are on the device. So a user sees an ad, and then you register a source in Google Lingo, and you define already the dimensions that you want to measure. And then
and registering a source is simply telling Google where the ad was placed, what app it was in, or what website it was in, correct?
Exactly. You can put a bunch of things in the aggregation key, which practically means the campaign, like you said, what country, whatever you decide to encode into the dimensions there. But yes, you define the dimension in that step, and that's the register source. It's in the publisher app. After the user installs the app, once they do events that you want to measure or revenue, you'll register it as triggers. So you can register multiple triggers.
So American triggers.
Exactly. So you can measure multiple triggers. There is a limitation here that we're going to mention soon enough. But triggers are practically only the events and metrics that you want to measure. And after you register the triggers, sometimes later, there's like a job scheduler that runs on the device. And once it runs, then you get what's called aggregatable reports, which are practically raw encrypted data. You can't do anything with it so far. So you have to keep it in your database and store it for a while until you get enough aggregatable reports, enough raw data. And once you do, then you take a batch of aggregatable raw reports and you send them to the attribution aggregation service. What the aggregation service does for you is decrypts the data, summarize it to a report. You can think about it as a table, and adds noise to each row of that table. So each dimension's permutations, for example, campaign A from country US, will contain multiple installs, and to that, and multiple revenue and multiple events, and to that, Google will add noise. So they say exactly what is the distribution of the noise, and you can already start thinking about how do I encode the right numbers in order to make the noise not very harmful.
Noisy.
So signal to noise ratio is here, right? So you want to have a much higher signal than the noise. So once you get back from the aggregation service a summary report, you have to decode the dimensions that you encoded when you registered the source and the trigger. And you need to try, using data science algorithms and whatnot, you need to try to remove the noise and to give the actual numbers. And the way we did that with SKAdNetwork, and I assume we will do the same here, is give you the approximation of a number and a confidence interval that really says how sure we are in the number that we give you. And that depends on the volume of the installs you had in that period of time.
And so, Ron, there was a lot of you need to and you'll get and other stuff like that, and what you're saying, and you're getting data that you can't understand, and it has to go somewhere that's not you, and then you get it back, and there's some noise added to it before you get it back. Now, please tell me that all the you here is actually singular, getting this data you can't decrypt, and then sending it someplace where it can get decrypted, where it gets its noise added, and then you get back out something that you can actually read. Is that, as a marketer, the you marketer doesn't have to do all that stuff? Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct. So we will do everything for the UA managers.
That's a promise. You heard it here first.
They don't even need to know everything that is going on under the hood. I'm sure they want to know how confident we are in the data, but all this infrastructure is something that we're going to support together with AggregateNetworks, and it's our job to prepare this infrastructure, which is a really cool infrastructure, by the way. But UA managers don't have to worry about it at all. They have to worry about what metrics and events they want to measure, and decide on which ones are the most prioritized, because it's hard decisions like we have in SKAdNetwork. We can't get all the events and revenue as we used to anymore.
Excellent. And you know what? You just ended our session here, because there's so much more that we do need to talk about. We need to talk about, wow, SDK runtime. We need to talk about the data that you've been talking about, the flow, what'll come back, all of that stuff, the modeling that you'll do. We'll have to talk about, web to app, what the impact we think will be here. Yuval, you've got a lot more to ask you, and Ron, we've got a lot more to ask you, but this just became part A, and they're going to have to do a part B a couple weeks down the road or something like that, because it's like 30 minutes and, probably a little long for this particular one. And also, you guys have lives you've got to, get back to, and I've got a meeting that I'm already late for as well. But thank you so much for this time. I really do appreciate that. We'll set something up. You have to talk to me again. That's the bad news. But the good news is you get the rest of your evening off. Is that cool?
Thanks, John. Sorry for taking our time.
Thanks, John.